He is 22 years old, and he is already dying. Not from a wound. Not from disease, though disease is everywhere in the underhive of Necromunda's hive primus. He is dying from the mathematics of where he was born. The calculation began the moment his mother delivered him in a hab stack on sublevel 403, in a district that has not seen natural light in 6 generations, in a city that processes more human beings per standard year than most worlds process or. He did not choose this. No form was filed. No official made a determination. The determination was made by geography, and geography in the Imperium of man is the most consequential lottery in human history. He works a conveyor shift. 12 hours. The conveyor moves promethium canisters from a processing node to a loading dock, and he moves with it, walking the same 40-meter stretch of grading back and forth, in air that tastes of chemical runoff and recycled exhalation. He has done this since he was 14. Before that he sorted waste. Before that he carried messages for a gang that no longer exists. He has never been to the upper hive. He has seen pic captures of it, cleaner air, wider corridors, light that comes from somewhere other than failing lumens. But the upper hive is not a place he will go. Not because it is forbidden, though access controls exist at every transit gate between levels. Because the upper hive costs money, and money is a quantity that the underhive is structurally designed to prevent him from accumulating. He earns enough to eat. On good weeks, enough to eat and pay the hab fee. On bad weeks, he borrows the difference. The loans exist in the underhive in the same way the conveyor exists. They are infrastructure, they are permanent, they are the mechanism by which the system moves. He does not think of the loans as a trap. He thinks of them as the way things work. This is correct. They are the way things work. He will be dead by 35. The underhive heir will do it, or the work will, or the gang that replaced the gang that no longer exists will settle a debt he doesn't remember incurring. His death will not be recorded in any administrative file that matters. He will not appear in the tithe census as a loss. He will appear in the tithe census, if he appears at all, as a unit of labor already consumed. The conveyor will continue moving. Someone younger will walk his 40 meters. This is not a story about him specifically. It is a story about the address where he was born. In the Imperium of man, that address is a sentence. The Imperium classifies its worlds. This is one of the few administrative functions it performs with genuine consistency. The classification system is not primarily humanitarian. It is logistical. The administratum needs to know what a world produces, what it can be made to produce, and what investment is required to maintain that production. The planetary classification that appears in Munitorum records is not a description of what life is like on a world. It is a description of what that world is for. There are broadly several dozen classification categories in full use across the Imperium, but the ones that matter for this account are the ones that contain the largest populations and the highest mortality. Hive worlds, death worlds, agri-worlds. These 3 categories contain, by conservative administrative estimates, the majority of the Imperium's human population. They are not equivalent. A hive world citizen and a death world citizen and an agri-world citizen occupy different positions in the imperial machinery. But they share one characteristic. The world they were born on has already determined most of the parameters of their death. The variation is in mechanism, not outcome. Start with the hive world, because the hive world is where the largest numbers live and die. A hive world is a planet whose surface is dominated by massive arcologies, hive cities, that house populations numbering in the hundreds of billions. Necromunda is the canonical example, documented extensively in Munitorum records and administrative census reports dating back to the 38th millennium. Hive Primus alone houses a population estimated between 40 and 80 billion, depending on which census you trust, and how aggressively the underhive populations are undercounted, which they always are. The hive city is vertically stratified in a manner that is not metaphorical. The wealthy live at the top, where the spire pierces the toxic cloud cover and the air is filtered. The middle strata house the administrative and skilled labor classes. The underhive sits below the city proper, in the accumulated industrial runoff of 10,000 years of production, and it houses the people the hive needs for its lowest functions and does not need to keep alive for long. Life expectancy in the underhive of a standard hive world is documented in Munitorum medical records compiled for conscription assessment purposes. The Imperium tracks this not out of care for underhive populations, but because it needs to know how long a conscript from a given environment will remain combat effective. The figure that emerges from these records for underhive populations on class extremis hive worlds, the highest production classification, is a median life expectancy of 31 standard years. This is the median. Half the population dies before 31. The causes are not mysterious. Air quality in the underhive of Hive Primus is documented to contain particulate concentrations approximately 40 times above the threshold at which human lung tissue begins permanent degradation. Respiratory disease is the leading cause of death in adults. In children under 5, it is malnutrition, followed by the infectious diseases that move through dense, poorly sanitized. The underhive worker on his conveyor is not being killed by malice. He is being killed by throughput. The hive city is a machine for producing industrial output at scale, and the fuel for that machine is human labor, and human labor in sufficient quantity costs less to replace than to maintain. This is not a philosophy. It is an accounting principle. The underhive does not lack medical infrastructure because the Imperium is indifferent to the underhive. It lacks medical infrastructure because medical infrastructure costs resources, and the return on those resources, measured in additional years of conveyor operation from a population that can be replenished from the same hab stacks that produced the previous generation, does not justify the expenditure. He knows this, in the way that people know the things they were born inside of. He does not have the vocabulary for it. He has the feeling of it, which is heavier and more constant than vocabulary. Now leave the hive. Go somewhere worse. Death worlds are classified under Munitorum designation Extremis Mortis, a category that exists, again, not as a warning but as a production assessment. A death world is a planet whose indigenous ecology is hostile to human life at a level that makes conventional settlement impossible without continuous military-grade resource investment. Katakan is the example that appears most frequently in imperial records, primarily because Katakan produces soldiers of exceptional quality, and the Munitorum therefore tracks it carefully. Katakan's surface is a dense jungle biome in which virtually every organism above microbial scale is either venomous, predatory, or both. The flora is carnivorous. The fauna includes apex predators that have no equivalent elsewhere in the catalogued Imperium. The Katakan devil, a creature large enough to swallow a sentinel walker whole, is documented in Munitorum threat assessments as class Vermis Extremis, the highest threat classification, applicable to non-warp entities. The Katakan barking toad, smaller than a human fist, can detonate with sufficient force to kill everything within a 10-meter radius when sufficiently stressed. The water supply on Katakan contains biological agents that kill unmodified humans within 72 hours of consumption, without specific local adaptation built up over generations. Life expectancy at birth on Katakan is 11 years. This figure appears in Munitorum conscription assessment records and is not disputed. Half the children born on Katakan do not survive to see their 12th year. The ones who do are, by that point, something different from baseline human. Not in a warp-touched sense. In a physiological sense, denser muscle fiber, faster reaction time, a nervous system calibrated by years of constant threat response into something that functions, in combat, at a level that line regiments cannot match. This is why Katakan exists in imperial records, not as a humanitarian crisis, but as a recruitment asset. The Katakan jungle fighters are among the most decorated regiments in the Astra Militarum. Their reputation for close-quarters combat is documented across hundreds of campaigns spanning 3 millennia. They are exceptional soldiers. They are exceptional soldiers because the planet they were born on killed everyone who wasn't from birth continuously without pause. The Imperium did not create this selection process. It inherited it, but it does nothing to interrupt it, because interrupting it would reduce the quality of the soldiers it produces, and the quality of Katakan soldiers has strategic value that outweighs any cost that might be assigned to an 11-year life expectancy at birth, if anyone were assigning costs to it, which no document in the accessible Munitorum record does. The child who survives Katakan to 17 will be conscripted. This is not a guarantee by written law. Technically, death world populations are subject to the same tithe provisions as any other world. In practice, it is a guarantee, because a Katakan who has survived 17 years on Katakan has already demonstrated selection characteristics that make them extraordinarily valuable to the Guard, and the Guard's conscription agents on death worlds do not practice restraint. The child who survives the jungle to conscription age will leave Katakan. They will probably never return. They will serve until they die, which for a Katakan jungle fighter in an active combat regiment is statistically likely to occur within 3 to 7 years of deployment, because the Guard uses its best shock troops at the front of the most dangerous assaults. The jungle made them. The Guard spends them. The jungle makes more. Now consider the agri-world, which is quieter and kills differently. An agri-world is a planet dedicated to food production for the surrounding subsector. Its surface is given over almost entirely to agriculture, vast monoculture. Fields, livestock processing facilities, atmospheric processors calibrated to optimize growing conditions, and the human labor infrastructure that maintains all of it. Agri-worlds are among the most important planets in any subsector, because they are the planets that feed the others. Hive worlds cannot feed themselves. The math is straightforward. A hive world with 80 billion inhabitants and a surface given over to industrial production requires food imports to survive, and agri-worlds are where those imports originate. Life on an agri-world is not as immediately lethal as the underhive or the jungle. The air is breathable. The water is clean or clean enough. The food is present. The agri-world worker has more reliable caloric access than the underhive laborer, and the work, while physically demanding, does not carry the same constant toxic load. By raw life expectancy metrics, an agri-world birth is better than a hive-world underhive birth. The trap on an agri-world is not mortality. It is conscription quota. The Departamento Munitorum assigns tithe grades to every world in the Imperium. The tithe covers multiple categories, or manufactured goods, specialized products, but the category that concerns agri-worlds most directly is bodies. The Astra Militarum needs soldiers. Soldiers must come from somewhere. The Munitorum's conscription quota system distributes the demand for soldiers across the Imperium's population in a manner that is, from the Munitorum's perspective, equitable. Each world provides soldiers in proportion to its population and strategic value. From the perspective of an agri-world population, the quota is a recurring extraction that comes regardless of harvest quality, regardless of disease outbreak, regardless of whether the previous year's quota left the farming operations understaffed. An agri-world with a tithe grade of Solutio Prima, a mid-range classification requiring substantial, but not catastrophic annual levies, will provide approximately 2 to 4% of its adult working-age population to the Guard each standard year. This figure is drawn from Munitorum records related to several subsectors documented in the archives of the Segmentum Pacificus. 2 to 4% annually does not sound large. Compounded over a decade, and the agri-world has provided 20 to 40% of its working population to a military deployment from which the majority will not return. The farming operations continue because they must continue. The hive worlds that depend on them will starve otherwise, and a starving hive world produces civil unrest that costs the Imperium far more than a depleted agri-world labor pool. The labor pool is replenished through birth rates that the planetary administration is, quietly, expected to maintain. An agri-world that falls below replacement birth rate will find its tithe grade reassessed. This is not a threat in any formal document. It is an outcome pattern that planetary administrators understand without it needing to be written. The agri-world child who reaches 16 will, at some point, receive a conscription notice. Not necessarily at 16. The quota timing varies, but the notice will come. If the harvest has been poor and the labor pool is thin, the local administration may request a deferral. Deferrals exist in the system. They are granted approximately 40% of the time, based on Munitorum records of petition outcomes in the Segmentum Solar for the period of the 38th to 39th millennium. 60% of the time, the petition is denied and the quota is fulfilled on schedule, and the field that the conscript was working before the notice arrived goes to someone younger, or goes unworked until someone younger is available. The agri-world is not a death sentence at birth. It is a deferred levy. The date varies. The outcome does not. The question that follows from all of this, the question that any functional person asks, when presented with these numbers, is whether escape is possible. Whether the underhive worker on his conveyor, or the Katakan child in the jungle, or the agri-world teenager waiting for a conscription notice, can do something that changes the outcome. Whether the system has gaps. It does not have gaps in the sense the question implies. It has channels. The channels are narrow, they are controlled, and they lead, uniformly, back into the imperial system. The underhive worker's theoretical escape route is the gang. Necromunda's underhive gang structure is documented extensively in Arbite's enforcement records. It is the dominant social and economic organization below the mid-hive transit gates. A gang offers what the conveyor does not: the possibility of accumulation. Territory, resources, influence, the potential to move up a level, to reach a transit gate that was previously inaccessible. Gangs are real. The possibility is real. The probability is what the records do not advertise. An underhive gang member in an active territory dispute has a life expectancy that is, on average, lower than the 31-year median for the general underhive population. The gang is not an escape from the mortality math. It accelerates the mortality math in exchange for a chance at a different outcome. Most of the chances fail. The ones that succeed, the gang leader who accumulates enough to buy mid-hive passage, the enforcer who gets recruited into a house's private security, exist in sufficient number to maintain the belief that the channel is real, while existing in insufficient number to represent a meaningful statistical pathway out. The Death World Child's theoretical escape route is performance. Exceptional soldiers get noticed. Exceptional soldiers get promoted. A catachan who distinguishes themselves in combat can rise through the Guard's meritocratic structure to a position that, while still service, is better resourced and longer lived than frontline infantry. This is true. It is also true that the path from catachan conscript to position of meaningful institutional security runs through years of frontline deployment, in which the casualty rates make the jungle look generous. The promotion track exists. The number of catachans who survive long enough to access it is a small fraction of the number conscripted. The agri-world teenager's theoretical escape route is the petition. The deferral exists. The mini-storm also accepts voluntary dedication. A young person who presents themselves to a local ecclesiarchy official as a candidate for service to the God Emperor can, in some circumstances, be processed through religious institutional pipelines that are separate from the military conscription quota. The Munitorum does not count mini-storm recruits against the tithe. This pathway is real. It is used. It leads to a life of service to the ecclesiarchy, which is a life of service to a different imperial institution, with its own mortality rates. Rates and its own absence of exit. Every pathway out of the birth world sentence leads into a different imperial institution. The Imperium is not a prison because it has walls. It is a prison because it is the entire surface. There is nowhere to go that is not also inside it. There is a man in the administratum records of Hive Primus, Necromunda, whose file appears in a planetary governor's administrative review from the 38th millennium, a review prompted not by his case specifically, but by a general audit of underhive labor productivity. He does not have a name in the record. He has a reference number, a HAB-level designation, and a notation that he submitted a formal petition to the Mid-Hive Administratum Office requesting reclassification of his labor classification from unskilled grade 7 to technical grade 4, which would have entitled him to mid-hive work assignment, mid-hive air quality, mid-hive caloric rations, and mid-hive medical access. His petition included documentation of self-taught technical skills. He had, over several years, taught himself maintenance procedures for the conveyor systems he operated, beyond the scope of his assigned function, and had been informally performing technical repairs that were officially the responsibility of a technical-grade contractor the facility could not consistently afford to retain. His supervisor had informally acknowledged his capability. He had formal letters to this effect. The administrative office reviewed the petition. The review took 14 months. The determination, when it came, was that reclassification required assessment by a guild-affiliated technical certification body, that certification required payment of a guild assessment fee, and that the fee was set at a level calibrated to guild member income, specifically technical grade income, not unskilled grade income. He could not pay the fee. Without the certification, the reclassification could not proceed. The petition was denied and archived. He continued operating the conveyor. The informal technical repairs he had been performing were subsequently assigned to an actual technical grade contractor, eliminating the labor he had used to demonstrate his capability. His file closes 7 years later with a notation that he died of respiratory failure at age 34. The system did not assess his petition and find it wanting. The system assessed his petition and found it correctly categorized. He was unskilled grade 7. The fee structure that prevented reclassification was not designed to prevent his reclassification specifically. It was designed to maintain the integrity of the guild certification system, which was designed to maintain the value of guild membership, which was designed to maintain the productivity and reliability of technical-grade labor classifications. His case was not a malfunction. His case was the function, operating correctly. The file is archived. The conveyor continues. Return to the mathematics, because the mathematics are where the full picture becomes undeniable. The Imperium of Man maintains a population estimated, and the word estimated carries significant weight here, for reasons the video on the administratum census will address separately, at somewhere between 1 quadrillion and 1 septillion human beings. The range is not a failure of research. It is a reflection of the actual uncertainty in imperial records. The administratum does not know how many people live in the Imperium. What it knows is what those people produce and what they owe. Of that population, the distribution across world types is roughly as follows, based on munitorum tithe records and administratum census fragments. Hive worlds contain the largest single concentration of human population, estimated at between 30 and 40% of the total imperial citizenry. Agri-worlds and their associated labor populations represent another significant fraction. Death worlds are population small but strategically disproportionate in military output. Apply the life expectancy figures. Underhive populations on hive worlds, approximately half of all hive world residents, carry a median life expectancy of 31 years. Apply that to 30% of a quadrillion people, and the number of humans dying annually from underhive mortality conditions alone is a figure that has no meaningful emotional resonance because it is too large for the human brain to process as human. It is not intended to have emotional resonance in imperial accounting. It appears in the records as a labor replenishment rate, a conscription pool projection, a resource allocation baseline. Death world populations have an 11-year median life expectancy at birth. The total death world population is small relative to hive worlds. Death worlds are not productive at scale for most commodities. Their value is specialized. But the absolute numbers are not small. The children dying in their first 11 years on death worlds are dying in numbers that any pre-imperial civilization would have classified as catastrophic. The Imperium classifies them as selection pressure. Agri-world conscription at 2 to 4% annually, compounded across the subsector's agri-world network, produces a soldier yield that sustains the Guard's replacement rate for active campaign losses. The Guard loses soldiers at a rate that requires constant replacement. The replacement rate requires conscription quotas that deplete the labor pools that produce the food that feeds the hive worlds that produce the industrial output that funds the Guard. The loop is closed. Every component depends on every other component. Remove any element and the loop fails. This is the architecture that makes the birth world sentence inescapable. It is not policy. It is interdependence. The underhive worker is dying because the hive city needs throughput and cannot afford the infrastructure to keep him alive longer. The catachan child is dying because the jungle is selecting for soldiers and the Guard needs soldiers. The agri-world teenager is being conscripted because the Guard needs replacements and the food loop requires agri-world labor to sustain it. Each individual death is the local expression of a systemic requirement. The system requires these deaths, not as a goal, as a consequence that is accepted because the alternative, rebuilding the loop so that these specific deaths no longer occur, would require dismantling the interdependencies that keep the Imperium functioning. The Imperium is 10,000 years old. It is as old as it is in part because it has never attempted that dismantling. The architecture that kills the underhive worker and the catachan child and the agri-world conscript is the same architecture that defeated Horus, that held the Eye of Terror, that absorbed the first Tyrannid hive fleet and continued. The deaths are the price of the survival. The survival is real. The deaths are real. Neither cancels the other. He is 22. He is on the conveyor. The shift has 9 hours remaining. He does not know he is part of a calculation. He knows only that the air tastes wrong, and the loan is due at the end of the week, and the hab fee went up again, and there is nowhere to go that is not 40 meters of grading, back and forth, in the accumulated dark of 6 generations below the light line. He is not exceptional. He is not a conscript. His classification is labor, not military, and underhive labor classifications are below the conscription threshold for this particular tithe cycle, though that can change and has changed in leaner years when the Guard's need outpaced the agri-world supply. He is not a death world survivor. He is simply a man on a conveyor in a hive city on a planet that was classified before he was born, whose classification determined his floor and his his ceiling, and the approximate date at which the system will be finished with him. He will not read his own file. The file does not describe a tragedy. It describes an input. The Imperium of man does not require that its citizens survive. It requires that its citizens produce. The underhive produces labor until the labor fails. The death world produces soldiers until the soldiers are spent. The agri-world produces food and conscripts in the ratio the tithe demands. The system does not ask whether the person inside the classification is content, or suffering, or capable of more than the classification permits. The system asks what the classification produces. While it produces, the system continues. This is not indifference in the human sense of the word. Indifference implies awareness and dismissal. The system does not dismiss the underhive worker. It does not see him. He appears in the records as a labor unit, a productivity figure, a replenishment statistic. He is accounted for, in the only sense that accounting applies here, from the moment of his birth to the moment the file closes. The address where he was born is a sentence. The sentence is not a punishment. It is a classification. Classification, unskilled labor, underhive, hive primus, necromunda. Projected service duration, 18 to 20 years from intake. Replenishment source, available. Loss on expiry, none recorded. System status, functioning within parameters.